Good morning. Yeah,
That's why.
that's what we want to hear. I'm not a morning person, those of you here that know, so this is very challenging for me. But I welcome you all here. On behalf of the 2017 National Multicultural Conference and Summit team, we welcome you to our Friday session of the summit. And on behalf of the team, we'd like to give thanks to the indigenous people of Portland for allowing us to gather in their traditional territory today and for the duration of the summit. I'm not really going to give a whole lot of welcoming, yes. I'm not going to read bios or give a lot of welcoming remarks because I want our time to be spent listening to the wise remarks of our early career psychologist panelists who have already contributed so much to the field of multicultural psychology. Their full bios are printed in our lovely program booklets. I'll just briefly introduce them by name. We have Carlton Green at the end. We have Melissa Teehee. We have Mira Krishnan, who just got in at 1 a.m., so let's give her an extra loud round of welcoming applause. And our fabulous, newly minted Rising Star National Multicultural Summit honoree, Dr. Kevin Nadal, who will moderate this morning's conversation. So without further ado, let's give them another round of applause.
Hey. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Hi. Mariah Carey needs her mic on.
I think you're on.
Okay, just checking. I can't hear. What are you going to do? I went number one. What are you going to do? All right. So welcome, everyone. I'm so honored to be here, to be able to moderate this really highly esteemed panel, and I'm really thankful to the coordinators for allowing this opportunity to happen. I know that as a graduate student and as a early career psychologist, I always yearned to find more opportunities to learn about what it means to be a psychologist and a human being at the same time. I think we spend a lot of time training ourselves to be psychologists, whether it be clinically or as researchers, but what about the personal aspects? What about the ways that we struggle? What about the obstacles that we have to face, and how can we keep our head up throughout it all? So what I wanted to do for this panel, one, was to make my panelists all a little anxious and not prepare them in any way. And then David wanted me to write or to try to prepare people, and then I wrote questions, and I'm not even going to ask them. So, because I want to keep it real, right? That's been a theme for me, not just my entire life, but especially in the past months, that we no longer can have these superficial relationships. We no longer can talk about things on the surface level. We have to just keep it real and be honest and speak our truths, because if we don't speak our truths, then no one will. One thing that I wanted to get out of this panel is for everyone in the audience to be open, not just to the content of what we talk about, but also the process, to be able to listen and to learn, and to even for my panelists or our panelists to model what it means to be a psychologist and to be true to yourself. So what I'd like to do is just have everyone introduce themselves just very briefly in terms of where you work. And then I want you to answer the question of when did you fall in love with multicultural psychology? When did you know? So let's start over here with Mira.
Well, I'm Mira Krishnan. I'm a neuropsychologist by training, and before that I was actually an engineer by training. I currently run a private practice, a consulting firm. I do a mixture of consulting and some clinical work as well, and I do training and education. And that's been very recent. I started this about the beginning of this year. Before that, I ran an autism center for about 5 years. And it was at the autism center that I really fell in love with the idea of multicultural psychology. I started realizing that I knew a lot about the technology of diagnosing autism, the science of autism, to the extent that anybody knows anything about autism at all. But I didn't really understand a lot of the social issues my kids were experiencing. I started getting really interested in the systemic biases and barriers that were working against some of my kids. and making it harder for them and their families to succeed. And that was really where I fell in love with a multicultural approach to psychology.
Great, thank you. Melissa?
So I currently am at Utah State University. So I am starting, I just finished my first semester in my second year there. So I've been there for 3 semesters as a faculty member. And I came in there to direct the American Indian Support Project. And so I have been involved with Utah State University over, 13, 14 years at this point in time, through the Society of Indian Psychologists. My love for multicultural psychology, I guess, I don't know when, I've always lived that, right? And so the psychology that I've always studied and been interested in is, it starts with yourself. And so technically, then that falls within the realm of multicultural psychology, even though for me it's not going across cultures, right? So, but I get placed into that category a lot. And so sometimes I think, well, I don't know how multicultural my focus is. My focus is actually a lot of times unicultural in the sense of working with people from my tribe, so I'm Cherokee, and working with people, I'm a member of the Cherokee Nation, but I also work with Eastern Band Cherokee. And I remember writing the essay for internship about diversity, and I was like, well, every single case I see is multicultural in that case, right? I'm never working with somebody from my culture. I'm removed from the land. And so even if I'm working with somebody from another tribe, it's a totally different culture. So for me, it's just always been a part of it. I just never really thought about it earlier on, I think.
Okay, thanks. Carlton.
I'm Carlton Green. I am a staff psychologist at the University of Maryland Counseling Center. Falling in love with multicultural psychology is probably dates back to my first career. This is the second career for me. So I was a student affairs professional for about 10 years at a university down in Texas. And the title was Coordinator of Multicultural International Student Services. So how could I not be paying attention to multicultural psychology? I don't think that I knew what multicultural psychology was at that point. But I had colleagues across the state of Texas who were doing similar jobs to what I was doing, and they introduced me to the literature around multicultural psychology and multicultural education. And I think that I probably was reading things by people like Daryl Wing Sue and Janet Helms back then. I didn't know what I was reading, or I didn't know who I was reading. But then I was, and even sort of like going to BC and going to graduate school, when I went and Dr. Helms became my advisor, I still had no idea who Janet Helms was from those early experiences. But then sort of like one day looking at oh wait, I read this. Oh wait, I read this, and this is this woman. I was like, it was really kind of life altering. So I think even dating back then to the mid '90s is probably when I kind of fell in love with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about falling in love with multicultural psychology. I also think how a lot of times books are involved. So you read that one book that you're like, damn, that's it.
Yeah.
I want to continue reading this. I want to continue studying this. For me, it was, and this is going to make his head so big, Counseling the Culturally Different is what it was called, by Daryl Wing Sue and David Sue. Is he here? No, see, he doesn't come to my events. Thanks, academic dad. No, he's not here. All right. We would have heard his voice if he was here. No. Okay. But do you remember a book that you all read that you really liked, where you said, I want to continue reading this and I want to continue stuff? And it doesn't even have to be psychology.
I think actually that's a good place to start for me, because when I was in classes, people would start a class and what's your favorite neuropsychology book? I don't read neuropsychology books. What are you talking about?
Right.
But with all seriousness, when I trace back, on a lark, I took African American literature in college, and Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, was really what got me thinking about a lot of things early on.
Yeah. Either of you remember?
I do remember, actually. I'm thinking back to being an undergraduate student, and I read, well, it was assigned. I wouldn't have picked this for myself. But we had to read Tarzan. And the professor was excellent at being able to help us understand how, at the time that Tarzan was written, they were trying to really explain how even a white little baby who was born in the jungle among apes could grow up and develop into this fully functioning, independent human being. So what was wrong with black people? Why couldn't black people mature and become fully functioning people? And so using that from a historical perspective got me into thinking about racism as a system rather than really thinking about, so like interpersonal racism. It was really powerful to be back then as, I think, like a sophomore in college and really sort of like beginning to be introduced to those ideas. And I think that was really, it's kind of stimulated my thinking and the people that I began to befriend and begin to talk to about these issues, which those people are probably really still influential today in how I'm thinking about doing this work.
Right. Do you remember book, Melissa?
I mean, for me, I think it was an undergrad class, and it was a social psychology class, and we were assigned the book Confronting Racism. And so I still have that book. But I remember that was the first time of like seeing sort of these like jargon words and these technical terms for sort of all the things that you already know exist, but like really being able to like look at that and say, oh, people are studying this, and this is how they are doing that, and like this is my day-to-day experience and things like that, and just figuring out like, oh, and there's people talking about it. And so I think for me that book was the part that said like, oh, I can do this, I can do research in this now.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a combination of reading research, reading books, and also taking these classes, it sounds like, right? So I remember the first multicultural psychology class I took was an undergraduate class called Asian American Psychology, taught by Marianne Takemoto. And then from there, I was like, ooh, this is an actual thing? Like, we can study this? I told some folks a few days ago that I never had any professors of color. I never had any teachers of color until I took a class with Marianne Takemoto and with Thomas Parham, who I took African American psychology with, or African psychology is what it was called. And just to know that not only is it that we are invalidated in knowing that multiculturalism should be infused into psychology, but just to even see another psychologist of color, to see a professor of color, that's revolutionary. And I think sometimes I need to pinch myself because when I was a kid, I never even knew what a Filipino-American professor was, and now I have this opportunity that I never had before. So I think I want to shout out that having these classes, people remember that. So even when you have that one awful diversity class where, the one where like you have to start taking like cardiovascular disease medicine, that even if there's that one problematic student, there are the 10, 20, 100 other students in the room who you're touching in some way. So, I want to shift gears and talk about some of the struggles. Like, what does it mean for you all to do the work that you do? What are some of the systemic barriers that you have to face regularly? And how do you face it? I think one thing I also want to make sure is that we're not telling you what to do, and we're not even going to solve anything today. But I want to at least talk about the process of how do we even think about tackling some of these things. How about Melissa, let's start with you.
I think for me, one of the things that's come up recently with the stuff going on in Standing Rock, and something that I have been working with one of my students about, and a few of our students, is you feel this pull, right, to go and help that community in that way, and you are tethered to this place that is not your place, not with your people, right, at this university, and this feeling that you want to go and help in whatever way you can, and trying to weigh that, and how do you not go because you're teaching a class or you're in your first semester of graduate school, and how do you work that out, and thinking about, okay, long term, my staying here is going to allow me to do more later. And just things like that, struggles like that, have come up a lot this semester, I think. So.
Yeah, this reminds me of another thing, is that when you come from different marginalized communities, we have to navigate so much, not just getting tenure, not just doing clinical work, but then making decisions like this. And that has an impact on your psyche that a lot of people either dismiss or invalidate or say doesn't exist or shouldn't exist. So I want to validate that. And sometimes when you're the only one in your department or in your institution and you're going through this, then they make you feel like you're crazy. Why are you even going to consider doing this? Or why are you even stressing about that? And sometimes I think it's funny when people have the audacity to think that, that they even do half of what you do. Because when you have all these identities, you have to juggle so many things, and as many people say, be 20 times as good. So I want to validate that experience of just the psyche of having to make decisions like that. Carlton, any obstacles you're dealing with? Or has racism been solved?
No, it ain't been solved. But on some level, it's probably, I would think about, so like racism and heterosexism, classism, those are the barriers that I think that I experience, especially in doing the work. I think, this could be risky. So I work at the University of Maryland Counseling Center. I think that in the field, we have a reputation for being a place where people come to work on multicultural issues as far as training is concerned. But we have our issues too, right? I think that when whiteness dominates sort of like conversations, or when heterosexism dominates conversations, or when whiteness or heterosexism or one of the isms allows people to hide so that they don't actually join in the fight against certain issues, that's what makes it difficult for me. Yeah. So, you know, with everything that's been happening with Black Lives Matter, well, not on our campus, we've had our own Black Lives Matter issues. We've had issues around sexual orientation. We've had some white supremacy stuff emerge. We've got tons of undocumented students on our campus. And then when these issues occur and the allied folks in the center don't speak up, and that means that those of us who are really invested and we are going out and doing the work, that kind of pisses me off and it wears me out, and those become the issues that I really feel like I'm dealing with. I feel like I'm in a place where we can do the work, but then when other people don't step up, that's what makes it harder.
Right. And what we're seeing is that complacency. Yeah, let's give a round of applause for that. We're seeing that complacency actually can be much worse than a lot of this overt discrimination and people being biased, because people still aren't talking about these things in direct ways. Yeah. And a lot of times the people that are us, and we're exhausted. And we want an ally to step up. If someone else could step up and have the conversation so that I can just sip my tea and watch this just once, that would be so helpful for me, right? And my psychological health. But let's go on to Mira. What are some of the struggles that you're going through or that you've had to overcome?
You know, I think, in talking to a couple of people just before this panel started, I think we're all trying to understand this sort of post-truth economy of ideas right now, and what that means. Coming to psychology from the outside, I kind of think of myself as your biggest fangirl. I was an engineer before, and when I came in, I started really studying psychology. I found out how much you all have done and how much you've learned. And how out of sync our understanding culturally of psychology is with what you've done. And part of my work is to get that out there. So I think really, you know, we do deal with this fact that everybody at some level is an expert in psychology, and everybody at some much greater level thinks that they're an expert in psychology, you know, who isn't an actual psychologist. And so getting that information out there and having nuanced conversations about the work that you've done and the knowledge that is out there and the objective nature of that knowledge, I think is a big barrier, because otherwise we just have conversations about ideas without data, without evidence, without facts. And we keep going around in circles, and you know, that leads to like the kind of ridiculous situations like asking whether we're post-racism, you know, which I think hopefully everybody in the room thinks that that's kind of a stupid question. But out there, not everybody thinks it's a stupid question.
Right. Yeah, I find we as a field need to find more ways to give psychology away. We need to stop publishing only in academic journals. We need to stop teaching only in classroom settings. We need to stop just talking amongst ourselves. And so I want to know, what are some ways that people in the audience can tangibly do that? How can we, as psychologists, use our expertise and our knowledge and our power to influence our country, especially regarding social justice issues? Let's start with, actually, Carlton, let's start with you.
Ooh, okay. I mean, it's a big question. Of course, I could probably go down the road of talking about social media and what that means for, especially this incoming generation of psychologists, how we could be more invested and involved there. I'm a little bit old school, you know, like I said, this is my second career, so I'm probably not as into social media as probably some of my peers and younger counterparts are. For me, there is a piece, though, about thinking about it as a practitioner specifically, as somebody who practices psychology, as somebody who is with people on a day-to-day basis talking about issues. I do wonder about my capacity for being able to write things for like the local newspaper, or even for the campus newspaper, or for whoever the intended audience is, to in some ways give away what it is that we're doing. Like one of the things that I have really learned a lot at my center, while I say, you know, we have our issues too, the thing that I've learned that's most important is we've got to figure out how to recover. It's not that something happens, it's that we've got to figure out the process of how to recover from this racist or heterosexist or cisgender issue that just occurred. And if we can figure out how to do that using our skills, we need to figure out how to tell other people how to do that, right? And if we don't do that, we're failing multicultural psychology, right? Yeah. I think the other piece that's really important for me, I think about being a member of a historically black church in Alexandria. The church is about 200 years old, really significant. President Obama has been to our church for the past 2 Easter Sundays. So it's a really influential place in this area. And I think about being right now on the front lines of trying to get that church to be more open to issues of sexual orientation and gender diversity, like really engaging some people, specifically in our mental health ministry, around what we need to do, was really trying to get people to respond to what happened in Orlando, knowing that we've got some sisters and brothers of color who are sexual minorities and folks who are along the gender diverse spectrum in our congregation. We need to be putting something out because those people are going to be traumatized. We're talking a lot about Black Lives Matter. We need to be talking about these other lives that matter too. And so really challenging the church. And so, you know, in January, there's going to be a series about homophobia in the church, at this church. I mean, my goodness, right? So we really got to figure out how to give it away.
Thank you for that. I think it's really important just to see that sometimes it takes that initiative just to say, I think we need to do this, and then make it happen. Others, any thoughts on other ways that we can practically give psychology away? Mira?
I'd like to actually bring this back to this idea of being an early career psychologist. I actually really hate that term, ECP. And I don't know if the other ECPs in the room do as well. In fact, whenever I'm asked if I'm an early career psychology, I need to Google what that means and see if I still meet the criteria. Which I do, I think, for a few more years. But certainly I'm cognizant of the fact that I make a lot more money than most people who are called an early career anything, and have a lot more influence in my community. But what I want to talk about really quickly for those of you who are early in your careers like me, as well as those of you who support us, is as an engineer, I think a lot about the fact that we are increasingly less risk tolerant over the course of our careers. Psychology as a field is structured in a way that we think about people who are in their mid-30s or even early 40s as early career clinicians, and oftentimes that is a stuck and set kind of thinking process where we think about ourselves taking on careers that look like the people who came before us. We need to be thinking, I think, as well about many of us taking on careers that the people who came before us didn't think about. When I look at what's really interesting going on in disseminating psychology in new ways, certainly getting in front of people and talking is important, and I do that. I'm very interested in things that are going on in the world of gamification. If some of you have seen this wonderful role-playing game where you play a Black grad student, go check it out. It's free. You can download it online. I'm blanking on its name right at the moment, but that's a really great example of something very different. And I think if we can find ways to do that that are non-cloying, like really making high-quality video game experiences and other kinds of experiential learning environments for people, as well as engaging on social media. I'm more of an age where social media comes naturally to me. I think we should be looking at these ways to do things and use psychology in ways that aren't part of a traditional psychology career pattern. And that's where I hate this idea of ECP, because I think that the career that I'm building is not like the one that I was trained to have. And so I would really encourage all of you who are not early career psychologists, whether you don't identify that way or you just aren't according to APA's terminology, to support us in doing that. Because oftentimes I think the deck is stacked against trying things. And the problem with that is that as we get older, we become naturally less willing to try things. And so I just want to see more of that. Whether it's gamification or whether it's another kind of way of getting the information out there in a non-traditional format.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there are a lot of obstacles, things like whether or not you're going to get tenure, or whether or not you're producing enough, or whether or not you have to do whatever the clinic needs you to do and find outcomes. That we deal with all of that, and then we have this extra task of seeking or advocating for social justice. But any strategies that you might recommend, Melissa?
So for me, I am totally different in the social media area, is that I don't have Facebook. I never have. Like that really, like all of that sort of goes against my way of being and how you interact with people and having like all these fake friends and so for me, like I would never put energy into that. But it is becoming this point where like I'm hearing people talk about like, oh, there's this Facebook group for, like early career psychologists in this area, and like you can get this information and like finding out about things. And so trying to figure out how to like navigate that and still be true to who I am.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest way that I have been disseminating some of this stuff is just through the classes that I teach, right? So I teach multicultural psychology in a very rural town in Utah. And when I teach the class, I will have students say like, oh, I've never met anybody that's American Indian before. Well, they always say Native American. No matter what I call myself, they always say Native American back. But I think, well, that's probably not true. Like you probably are like looking for a stereotype of what you think. But then I also sort of look around and then I think maybe actually that is true if they've never left that community. So just the things that I talk to them about, they are very much culturally programmed to not look at these issues, right? So to like go in, so in our program for undergrads, they have to take either psychology of gender or multicultural psychology. They have to take one or the other, and they don't want to look at any of these things.
And they're two different things, right? Because they can't be intersected at all.
Well, I think they get a lot of the same information, but at least they feel like they have a choice, right? So in that realm of just like opening up their minds to these things, and I have them, they write these final capstone papers because they have to volunteer with local refugees in our community, and they're helping them study for the citizenship test, right? My class runs this clinic. I make them do these interactions, and they'll like come back and say, oh, I didn't even know we had a refugee population here. Things like that, and so making them interact with people and making them uncomfortable and having them move through that being uncomfortable, right? I always start class with like, okay, so we're going to talk about race and ethnicity, and for some reason, for you guys, this feels so awkward. I said, it's like talking about sex with your parents, like. Why is that, right? Like I talk about it every day, but I mean, I also worked with couples and got very comfortable talking about sex, like through my clinical training as well, and they don't want to talk about any of these things, right?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, sometimes we have these opportunities to talk with people, and sometimes we might be frustrated with their perspectives. And we can either walk away, and people can do that and feel like that's better for their psychological health. And then other times people say, no, you always have to fight, or you always have to talk, or you can't defriend people on Facebook because now how are they going to learn? And I think that's really aspirational, but at the same time, sometimes you just need to defriend that person,
you do.
right? So how do you manage that? How do you make that decision of whether or not you need to have that conversation? Or is it okay, or is it even okay to just walk away?
So for me,
Yeah.
this is easy. I mean, I think about, you talk about this, I defriend people with ease. And I will say, you know, on my page, don't bring your white racial anxiety here trying to tell me why my perspective is wrong. It ain't welcome. Or don't bring your heterosexist whatever. It ain't welcome here. One of the things that I learned in graduate school, thinking about, learning about racial identity development and talking about the Helms's racial identity social interaction model, which doesn't get a lot of play in the literature. She talks about regressive relationships. And regressive relationships occur when the person with more social power has a less developed racial identity status than the person with less social power. And this isn't written anywhere, but in our conversations, her advice when you're in those relationships is get out. Mm-hmm. You have to get out of them because they will kill you, right? And I'm not going to sit up on my leisurely Facebook page trying to interact with somebody who's trying to kill me. That just don't make no sense to me. Mm-hmm. So bye, you got to go.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on friending, defriending?
Well, you've unfriended Facebook.
I just have no friends, so.
Yeah.
I don't have to listen to anybody's thoughts, all me.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of functioning both as an ally and as a part of marginalized groups. I'm transgender and I'm Indian American. As far as being Indian American goes, my family comes from economic privilege, and although my parents, kind of skipped a generation of that privilege by coming here, things have been really easy for me, and I am more aware of being an ally racially than being marginalized most of the time. The reason I bring that up is that, especially on social media, but also out there, in board meetings and other kinds of settings. Board meetings are actually probably where I end up educating white people who are a little clueless, because that's what often happens when it comes to multicultural issues in the business of healthcare, and as well as other sectors. So I think about the implicit bias literature. The implicit bias literature says that things like empathy are helpful to some extent in reducing bias. But empathy is a non-necessary but useful precondition. If you walk into exposure situations with empathy, particularly cognitive empathy, meaning being able to take other people's perspectives, those situations tend to be helpful in reducing your bias further. But having the empathy itself is not particularly helpful. The reason I bring all of that up is that exposure is really, really important. I'm really cognizant of the fact that oftentimes lots of people don't know any other transgender people besides me, may not know very many other Indian Americans besides me either, and may not know very many other people who are thinking or talking about issues of race and issues of economic privilege other than me. And so I actually take the approach of trying to tolerate that, and that's an ally approach, I think. I do that more as an ally, of trying to be in those situations because over time, exposure is the strongest predictor of reducing implicit bias.
Yeah. Can I say something about that, Kevin? I mean, I think that being an ally is actually really important. I guess for me, I'm not talking necessarily about defriending people when I'm in an ally position, but when somebody I'm the target of somebody's foolishness, you got to go.
I would not deal with transphobia
Right,
probably on my timeline
right.
in the way that,
Yeah.
exactly.
I wonder, picking up on something that you said, I think many of us in our multicultural psychology courses often have to do these immersion activities where we go out and we expose ourselves to some type of difference. The more I'm thinking about this, and I wonder about the future of multicultural psychology in some ways, do we also have to find ways to have white men go out and be with other white men and begin to talk about and think about the psychology of that from a coursework perspective, right? Or how do we have other, cisgender people go out and observe what's the psychology of these cisgender people, really thinking about that? Because if we don't do that, right, we're not going to solve any of these issues. We need white people and cisgender people and heterosexual people out there thinking about what's happening there. And also, in some ways, like what's the strengths of being a part of this group? Not just thinking about this group as being a horrible, terrible, oppressive group, but also what are the strengths associated with this group? Because if we don't get people to start thinking about what the strengths are, we won't get people to actually be engaging in the conversations, because they'll think that we're always saying that you're a horrible person. No, you got some stuff to bring to the table too, in addition to your oppression, but you got to be able to own all of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that for me, there's a balance between whether or not you have that conversation then, whether it's worth it, whether you think it's going to raise your blood pressure, whether or not you think that at the end the person would be being open to a conversation. And so I think I'm a big fan of not defriending people, but unfollowing them, putting them in a special place called spam, and then just being really mindful of, do I have the psychological and spiritual capacity to deal with something right now? And if you don't, take care of yourself.
Yep.
And so I'm a big fan of that. So I want to switch gears, and I want to talk about something that we often don't talk about publicly, that I'm willing to bring up, and I'm hoping you all are as well, but this thing called imposter phenomenon. And this is something that plagues a lot of people from, I felt that in the room. Ooh.
This is a conference for imposters, right?
I know.
Like we're all imposters here.
So just this idea that oftentimes we don't feel we're good enough. We often feel like we didn't deserve where we got. We were lucky that somehow you didn't work as hard as somebody else, or you're not as smart as somebody else. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but I have anxiety dreams at least like once a year that I get my PhD taken away. But this is it, and a lot of it is related to internalized oppression. So I wonder if any of you have experienced anything related to imposter phenomenon, and what do you do with it?
I mean, let's be real, right? I'm sitting in a chair where Rosie Bingham sat yesterday. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I am like anxious as hell sitting up here. I mean, because I'm worried about, am I going to say something that's wrong or inappropriate, or that's going to show some type of ignorance on my part. I think that I walk around with it every day. And then at the same time, as I was sitting back there in the corner watching the panel yesterday, the thing that settled in on me that I often go to, which I find really useful, is I had to take a moment and think, wait, you're a little black boy from Monroe, Louisiana, from a single parent home, who had a lot to deal with. And you here in this room with these people, right? You've done some things, you've said some things, you've written some things. People have said that there's something good about what you bring. You deserve to be here, right? I have to remind myself from where I did come all the time. And sometimes it's the same story, but it helps. It really does help.
Thank you. Melissa?
So, I feel that, right? Like the conference brochure, like somebody took a picture of it because I was carrying mine, but I hadn't looked at it, and I was like, what? Like my picture's on the front of that? Right. And that's a moment where it's not the imposter syndrome, it's just more of like, wow, that's crazy. And so I kind of said that, and my husband said, well, it's crazy that like you have like worked so hard and like devoted your entire life to this, that somebody recognized that for a minute? Like, why is that crazy? Yeah. So, I think things like that happen for me, but I think I don't experience imposter syndrome in the way that other people do, because I grew up with such a worldview of non-competition, so I don't compare myself. Like, I know that other people know way more than I do on certain subjects and things like that, and that's okay. Like, that's why we collaborate. I don't have to know everything. It's just, to me, it's more, am I willing to do the work, because it is hard, daily, and that kind of thing. And so if I'm willing to do the work, then I absolutely deserve to be there just as much. And I think that's one of those things that I think walk into every situation, and I am unapologetically myself. I cannot be anything other than who I am, and some people don't like that, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't need to have a lot of friends, right? I just need a few core people, and so Yeah, for me, I think, but I think part of it is that coming from that worldview and that life way of like everybody can succeed, right? There is no reason that I shouldn't be happy for all of the good things that are happening to other people. And so I think for me that allows me to like step out of that situation. And I've like just always sort of been very like independent and different, right? Like so maybe being the only American Indian in my, maybe even in my undergraduate program or things like that. And so just figuring out how you navigate all of that, but never having somebody to compare myself to directly because there's not anybody out there doing the things that I'm doing, so.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do agree with Carlton, what you said. Like, I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves that we have come a long way, and similarly, you have worked hard. And I also recognize the process that it's hard to do that sometimes, and especially if you're the only one in your department, if you're the first blank group of, or first to do something of any, that representing any of your groups. That's why sometimes we need to remind each other to name it too. To name it. So if somebody is a friend of yours, a colleague of yours, looks like they are doubting themselves, to say, that's just your internalized depression happening. I don't have time for this, right? And I think in normalizing it, sometimes you just don't even want to talk about it. But I also like the idea that once you do it, and once you unapologetically just are yourself, then you don't have time to deal with other people's projections onto you. And so I think that's important for us to know. And one thing that I want to say is as you were talking about this, I was thinking about some of the earlier literature of multicultural competence and how a common message was that you have to leave your cultural baggage at the door. And I think what's important for us to recognize is that some of the trailblazers had to deal with those messages so that our generation could unapologetically be ourselves. So I want to give a shout out to the elders for trailblazing for us. But Mira, any thoughts on imposter phenomenon?
As a clinician, I think some of you can sympathize. That first time that you sign a document and there's nobody else to sign it after you is surreal. And then very quickly after that, one finds one is the expert in the room. I spend a lot of time around people other than psychologists, and what I've learned is it's a balance between recognizing what you know and also recognizing what you don't know. Autism taught me a lot of humility. I often quip that as an autism expert, I'm only marginally less ignorant than anybody else in the room on the topic of autism. And what I mean by that is that I feel that we know so little about what autism is and how it works that it makes me very aware of what we don't know. But we see that, like clinically, people give all kinds of opinions, and as somebody who studied the field, right, you're like, that opinion is, you just made that up, right? There's no scientific foundation for what you just said, but people believe you because they don't know the difference and because you're the expert. And so I think really what I really work on is that nuance of recognizing what I do know and recognizing what I don't know, recognizing as well what other people do and don't know. And then I think also I come at this from a background of engineering and physics, and in physics and quantum mechanics, we don't believe that you can observe something and have it have an independent identity outside of you, right? Like when you observe something, the observer interacts with the thing that's being observed in quantum mechanics. And in that same sort of way, so I bring that into psychology and I say, well, this idea that you would leave your baggage at the door is kind of ridiculous. Like it's not, it doesn't actually work that way. And I find that really freeing as well.
I was actually going to emphasize that point. I think that the beauty of multicultural psychology is that it's not only about, what it is about is that thinking from a multicultural psychology perspective, I get to show up in a room and know that if I'm the only black man there, or if I'm the only black gay man there, or whatever identity I bring a unique perspective to that. Right? And that's okay. It's actually probably pretty valued, or it's probably necessary for me to be in that room. We were talking about this yesterday in one of the roundtables we were doing on supervision about how, as a black male supervisor, when I sit with trainees who have never had a black male supervisor before, they say things like, well, I've never gotten that feedback before. And yesterday was really validating for me to think about, well, yeah, you ain't never worked with a black man before, so you've never had this perspective, right? And that's actually probably okay and necessary for you to be able to get this perspective. And so there's something about what we do that's actually validating for a part of it is to, like, when a student says to me, I've never gotten that feedback before, it does kind of kick up my imposter stuff. And then I have to settle down and think, actually, you need this. This will be balm for you. This will be a gift to you, right?
So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to know if you can give some advice to graduate students and other early career professionals in the room. One, more theoretical piece of advice, inspirational, think Oprah. And then two, something just practical, like a practical piece of advice, don't eat the pizza on Wednesday, something like that. What's a practical piece of advice that you might give someone?
So I think mine rolls in with sort of the imposter syndrome and just hearing, you use the word expert. And I have no pressure to feel like I have to be an expert, right? Think about all the things that I have learned. I'm gonna continue learning and I can look stuff up. Or like I said, I can collaborate. I can reach across disciplines and things like that. There are people there that, because I don't know everything. I don't know a lot of things. So I guess I never feel like I have to be an expert in anything. And when you are in a therapeutic setting and you're working with clients, in that sense of I really try to give that power back to them a lot. And I'm I'm not the expert, right? Things like that. And I do that in class too, because it was a very strange switch to go from being a graduate student and an intern to literally the next day being a professor, right? To be a faculty member and to walk around and these students are looking at you and you suddenly have all this power and privilege that you have that I had never experienced before, right? And what do you and being very thoughtful and mindful of the fact that what I'm sharing, that they view me as this expert, right? And I'm just learning things one chapter ahead of them, right? So I'm I was thinking well, if you read ahead, you actually will be the expert. So for me, I think that those things just take that pressure off of me, right? Because really, how I teach my class is really it's group therapy, right? So I give them these experiments to go out and try, right? Where they interact with people different from them, or they have to have a conversation about race, or things like that. But we talk about the experience. What was that like to do that? What were you feeling? How did you move past that? And my class is really run like group therapy. And so you see these changes happen across the semester. So to me, it's just me facilitating a conversation that eventually the class is going to be facilitating on their own towards the end. And that's my goal. So I guess I don't have to be the expert. I just have to be the facilitator, right? So.
Yeah. Others? Advice, words of wisdom?
You said something theoretical.
Yeah, something theoretical, something inspirational, and then something just
inspirational.
Practical,
okay.
tangible.
Theoretical, I would say, I was actually having this conversation with Dan Wilinski yesterday. Is he here? We were talking about how important it is for us in our own identities to be able to recognize that we have some stuff, right? Kevin was just talking about the internalized stuff that you have when you're a person from a marginalized group. Well, when you're a person from a privileged group, you got some stuff too. And you need to be able to make sure, or really, for me, as a black man, I implore white people to know that you have some racism going on for yourself. And then as a man, I'm sitting in a place where I'm really trying to hold on to, I have some sexism going on here, and I need to be able to do something about that, right? I need to be more gentle with myself and accepting the fact that I can be sexist at the drop of a hat. No matter how hard I'm not trying to be, I can be, right? So I really have to hold on to that. So those of us with privileged identities, we need to be in a space where we can be more accepting of those ugly, difficult parts of ourselves that actually create problems for the people that we're trying to work with, right? So that's sort of like the theoretical piece. I think that the practical piece, and it's almost like a professional piece that I would say is, and I'm coming from a counseling psychology background, that's probably an important piece for me to throw out. As counseling psychologists, we get trained to be scientist practitioners. We've got to figure out how to not divide ourselves as scientists and practitioners, but we've got to figure out how to be both, right? So that means the faculty and the research people in the room have got to have more respect for the work that the practitioners are doing, and the practice people have got to figure out how to have more respect for what the faculty people are doing, and we've got to get on the same page because we're scientist practitioners, not scientists or practitioners. We're both, right? Inspirational. Y'all might have to come back for that. I'm not the inspirational kind, but I'll think of something.
You've been doing more than a little inspiring.
Have I?
I'm up here inspired anyway.
Well, good, okay, good. Great.
So one thing I would say is look for opportunities to collaborate outside your silos. Don't think that those opportunities need to come later or in sort of big highfalutin kinds of ways like RO1s or K awards or whatever. Look for those opportunities early and often. They can be really small. When I took my statistics courses, when I was trying to re-specialize and get into psychology and out of engineering, I took them with a sociologist, so I got to know how they think. And I found that incredibly rewarding. I spent time around nurse practitioners. I did research projects, and sometimes I came in because I was the stats expert, and sometimes I drew people in. And I think a lot of that came from my engineering background, where I oftentimes was trying to solve problems that I couldn't solve directly myself. I think being unafraid to do that early and often and in very small ways is one piece of advice I have. From a theoretical standpoint, I'd say don't be afraid to question really, really basic assumptions. If you want to hear me go on a tirade about how I think the biopsychosocial model is nonsensical, I'm happy to do that later. But that would be my example of one that I personally go on a tirade against. But question the really basic assumptions, because those basic assumptions probably weren't designed for people who look like you or the people that you serve. And those basic assumptions are probably more problematic than we realize. And that's something I bring in from engineering as well. But I think that that's something we should do more of.
Great. So yes, round of applause. So we have a little bit of time left. I want to see if we could just do some fun stuff so I can pretend I'm Oprah. So I'm just going to ask like quick questions, and I'll say your name, and I want you to free association. First thing you can think of. All right.
They're going to need to get ready to bleep my mic.
So we'll start. Carlton, psychology hero.
Janet Helms.
Melissa, same question.
I think I had the ability to work with Joe Trimble and Carolyn Barkus, but those are the people that really led the way in American Indian psychology.
Mira?
It's a little bit out of psychology, but Margaret Mead.
Great. Melissa, best movie that represents psychology.
Isn't that every movie?
Carlton?
I don't. You know what? I'm going to go with something that we just saw, Moonlight.
Mira?
I don't have a good take on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Favorite professional memory, Mira?
I somehow ended up in an APA session where I was singing Happy Birthday to Aaron Beck. I didn't really understand how that happened. It was very odd.
Melissa, same question.
I don't know.
Okay. Carlton?
This is pretty high up there. I would say probably, though, that last October I was a diversity scholar at the Association of Counseling Center and Training Agencies conference, and that was a highlight to give that talk there. It was a wonderful time.
And last question, one thing you wish you knew as a graduate student. Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes along with that, like, you don't have to learn everything in graduate school. Like, just let go. Check the judgment at the door.
Carlton, same question.
I would probably say learn how to write grants and get money.
Same question, Mira?
The philosophy of failing early and failing often.
Fantastic.
So deep.
All right, so I think we have like a few minutes for questions. So any people in the audience want to ask questions, raise your hand and scream your question or sing it.
Yeah.
Or there might be a
Yeah.
mic.
Do you give Ugg boots out?
Do I what?
Give Ugg boots out?
I could. You get an Ugg boot and you get an Ugg boot.
What's the movie for you, Kevin?
I was thinking Moonlight as a more recent thing, and then I always liked the symbolism in American Beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be my psych movie. Questions? Right here, yes.
So I'm just an undergrad, and I'm from South Dakota. So I just have a question, like, as an undergrad, like, I don't know much. So what is the best piece of advice any of you could offer to me as an undergrad? Like, I took in what you said, but like specifically for undergrads and opportunities to reach out to, I don't know.
Did you say you don't know much?
Yes.
So don't let that stop you.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that when you're applying to grad school, I've been talking to students who are applying to graduate school, and I think this is like the most crazy assumption that like you are currently in your undergrad and you're gonna go interview and like, they're like, well, what do you wanna research? Well, you don't even know what is possible at that point.
Yeah.
So just make something up and just stick with it.
Yep.
Seriously, like, and so just seem confident in that answer, even if it is just fake. Just fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
That actually is a really big part of that kind of fail early, fail often philosophy, which is that you can be sure about things and be wrong, and that's okay, and you can have lots of interests and lots of passions, right? I think that that's one of the most problematic things about the way that grad school works, this idea that you have a 30-year plan and you will only ever have one 30-year plan and it will be right. I'm not doing what my 30-year plan said. I'm not even doing what last year's plan said.
I would say get and find mentors, people who will be able to help you along the way. And listen to them when it feels really important, and if it doesn't fit, then throw their advice out and, keep going.
Ask another mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The other piece that I would say, and I wish somebody would have told me this as an undergrad too, I think it applies to graduate school, that your academic training is about learning how to think critically and communicate effectively. It's not about mastering economics or mastering psychology. It's about how to think about this stuff critically and then through the written word and the spoken word to be able to communicate what your ideas are. That's what we need to be mastering as students.
Mm-hmm.
Look at you all inspirational.
Oh, that's me, okay.
Yeah. I just want to add one thing, not only to find a mentor, but to any resource that a mentor offers you, like take it. I've seen so many times where I'll say, hey, this is a great opportunity, and students don't follow through. So it's not just that your mentors will do everything for you, but rather that you meet them where they're at and you take advantage of any opportunity that they give you. All right, so I guess we're out of time, but I want to thank our panelists for being here. I want to thank all of you for participating, and thank you to the conference for having us.
Yeah, so again, another round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you, Kevin.
Should can I do one thing? Can I give you all Oprah hugs? Hey, good for you.
How does that work?
She goes like this, put your hands up.
Yeah.
Thank you, yes. Melissa T, Carlton. Sorry.
So
I just always wanted to do that. Sorry.
I just want to once again thank our panelists. As somebody who falls within this artificial 10-year frame of an early career psychologist and someone who's just turned 40 and doesn't feel early in anything in my life, I really appreciate the deconstructionist approach and ideas that they were offering to us to help rethink what it means to be not only a psychologist, but somebody who's early in their career, to help free us to be more creative and innovative in the ways that we live multicultural psychology. So I thank you for sharing your gifts of wisdom with us. Once again, thank you so much.
This is fun.
So now we're going to go into the programs that start at 10 o'clock, so you have a few minutes to mill around and get to where you need to be. Thank you.